Hello, hello. Welcome everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you very much, as always, for joining the session. Um, we have addressed this topic already last year about Ukraine, a little bit in the emergency of the topic, and we tried at the time to make some scenarios and not so much forecast, but trying to explain what could happen and what will happen over the year. And the idea was to say, okay, today, well, 1 year later, I would say the emergency have passed. So what is remaining to happen? What has really happened compared to the scenario we had? So of course, it's quite important to take some time and to look on what is has happened and what is still going to remain to happen. And that's why we are having this session today. The next webinar is already announced. It will happen at the end of June, and we'll make a global energy outlook review for the first half of 2023. As you will see today, many things are happening already in 2023 with quite good figures, honestly. So the idea would say, okay, what will have happened on the first 6 months of the year, what will remain to happen on 2023, and we'll cover oil and gas, petrochem, and also energy transition topics. Normally in the conversation of this meeting, you already have the link to the next session, so you can already go and subscribe for it. Anyway, don't worry. After this session today, I will send you the slide of today's webinar, and I will put also the invitation for the next one. Anyway, as always, you're free to ask the question in the conversation of this webinar. We'll address all of them at the end with Jean-Charles. Talking about Jean-Charles, knows maybe you can jump in. I don't see you. Okay, there he is. Please don't hide.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you very much for organizing this event. Success of those webinars is confirmed webinar after webinar. So it's thank you very much for your loyalty and regular attendance to it. So it's encouraged us to continue and to diversify the topics. And so we will continue, of course, in 2023, trying to cover all the topics that you may have on your agenda and answer most of your questions. So today, for this specific meeting to review where we are and what should be the forecast, we'll start with some announcements about the company because we have some news we would like to share with you. We are going to be pleased to share with you. Then we'll review the comparison between our forecast last year and where we stand today. And then again, we'll check what we can anticipate to happen in the coming months with some conclusion regarding the geography reshuffle and some focus on key application, which are the one mostly affected by this Ukraine war in one way or another. Again, you are most welcome to put your question on the chat box, and then we'll take them at the end. So if we can move to the next slide. So yeah, the major news we wanted to share with you today is to inform you how the company is evolving to support its growth. Especially this significant growth that we face since the COVID period, especially last year, but also for this first part of the year. Again, the company is really growing extremely fast, facing great success in different countries like USA, Germany, France, of course, Italy, UK, Spain, India, Turkey, and I could extend that list. So this development of the company has motivated us to review a little bit our organization and to reinforce the team. First, with Jean taking over the role of CEO in the company, and the recruitment of a high-profile expert like Jack, who is joining as a Central Europe director. And what we like with Jack, except that beside the fact that he's a very nice guy, of course, but his expertise in energy transition and different aspects of the energy transition that you will have the opportunity to discover with him in the future. So, and that the plan, our plan is to continue this way, to structure our company and to continue to recruit high-profile experts in different regions or different areas, to consolidate our team and to improve our services to you and sharing competence with you in our analysis and forecast and anticipation on the market trends. So Jean, if you can move on. Okay, we have also updated the list of our references, not able to show everybody, unfortunately, and we apologize for all the people who are missing on this list here. We try to make a short list illustrating the different profile of company we have by size, by country, by areas in terms of mechanical equipment, instrumentation, electrical, piping, or whatsoever. And what you can notice is the increase of contractors coming more and more, and also for the first time end users. And reason why end users, especially in the USA, are interested in our database is very interesting, because they see how energy transition is offering opportunities and threats in terms of game changer. It can be with new customers, new operator, new contractors, and on that respect, end users start to be, we are questioned more and more by large operators like LyondellBasell in this example, who are very interested in using our database because they see it as a unique tool to trace with the right granularity all those new players, all those new technologies popping up and having a big impact on energy transition. So next slide then, we now move to the next step. So again, we remind you that the database today is offering you about 1,500 or 600 projects at pre-feed or feed design phase, with always the same logic. Only difference between oil and gas, petrochemical, and energy transition is the size of the project. Oil and gas and petrochemical, so we trace project above 100 million US dollar, while in energy transition, you may have noticed that we may go down to 10 million, maybe even below, because here we trace demonstrators and pilots, which are of course extremely important for you, and we intend to offer you this opportunity to position yourselves at very early stage. Those opportunities are emerging with new technologies. In this area, by the way, you will notice also on the database that we had regularly a new type of plant, and the last one we have added this week is about white hydrogen. So some of you may wonder what is white hydrogen, but I encourage you to have a look into the database and on those projects, and that's something we are going to trace also carefully now in the future. And we continue in that direction. Now, regarding the comparison between what we anticipated to as a consequence of the Ukraine war and today, we prepared you just a couple of slides, and we thought this exercise should be fair for you first, and also interesting for us to test and measure the reliability of the forecast we can give you and of our analysis. So last year, of course, you remember that Russia, of course, has been exposed to a ban in different areas, especially regarding the export of oil and gas, with major consequence on the project ongoing in Russia, but also for the supply or the replacement of the gas and oil being sourced out of Russia, which could be concerned. So the consequence and what we could measure all along 2022 and still today is that, again, we saw the confirmation that all the ongoing projects in Russia have been stopped. The project which were in operation are struggling because major contractors like Linde or Technip withdrew from Russia, and this export ban is mostly effective. There are still some countries turning around in a way or another, like India, for example, or some other places. But anyway, this export has a big impact, and we'll see that later on Russia financial situation. And it has also an impact on the companies themselves, especially Gazprom as an example, but not only, because all Russian operators are not able to find financing to support their contribution in projects. It may be in Russia, but also outside of Russia, because you know that a Russian company might have been involved in projects in Africa, in Middle East, like Iraq, for example, and those Russian operators have confirmed today to be really in deep trouble to finance their own contribution, and Gazprom especially is really in deep trouble for now. As a consequence, Russia, after making a huge money last year when the price of energy was picking up, is today in a very different situation, because the energy market has adapted to the situation, and now with the consequence on Russia, as you know. So regarding the sourcing, so it's clear that Europe has shift its gas supply outside of Russia. That was, of course, announced very early, but it was hard to measure how it would happen and at what scale it could happen. But we anticipate that oil and gas, especially oil, would remain at pretty high price for a certain period. That's what we saw in 2022 and beginning of 2023. But the lesson learned from this last month anyway, and thanks to softer winters than expected, that EU adapted pretty well and much faster than anticipated to this rerouting of the oil and gas supply to Russia. And today, especially for gas, especially the price of the gas is now more or less back to normal. And for oil, yeah, it's OPEC maintaining this price level. But anyway, otherwise, the price of the barrel would have, of course, come back to $60 or even below. Please. So LNG, you may remember that last year we gave you some figures about LNG market, as we would see how this market would be affected by this Ukraine war. And you have on the left all the figures that we gave you last year, and you have on the right where we stand today. And you see that, okay, we anticipated about 200 billion to be invested in LNG project to supply Europe. Today, reality is closer to 300 billion. So we were not fully exact, but at least the dimension was there. And as usual, you see that our estimation was conservative. Same thing for the number of trains, same thing for LNG import terminals. Here we are very much on the same scale. And regarding the LNG carriers, we anticipated 500 LNG carriers to be built up. And you can see that just the last order, which has been placed a few days ago, just last week, it was just a single order of 325 LNG carriers to be built up and to be by Asia shipyards. So, and of course, on the top of the 325, you have all the ones which are already ordered, who have been ordered all along the year. So we are widely above the 500. The reality is closer to 600 LNG carriers. So this market is absolutely huge, and we can only encourage you to focus on this market, because it's a huge opportunity for all your equipment and services. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Jean-Charles, and thank you for those details. In fact, it was quite important to come back to see, okay, what was happening. So you see that, okay, I would say mostly on the trend and where it was going, we were anticipating, I would say, the right direction. No, the extent is a little bit different, because last year we already anticipated big numbers, and in fact, what is happening is even bigger. So this part is a little bit the analysis, deep down analysis of those addition to project forecast. Because if we compare oil and gas, petrochem, energy transition, we try to compare the same scope, meaning that here we made the exercise of, okay, how much capex was supposed to be invested between the period of 2023 to 2027. Okay, and we make the comparison on versus the same period of 5 years between the vision we had in February 2022 and the vision we have today. And in a little bit more than 12 months, there were an addition of 900 billions in capex in US dollar. So it's massive, massive addition that we have seen going on the forecast. You have here the pipeline for 2022. You have the same one for 2023. And of course, okay, during those 12 months, many projects were announced, which is just normal life, I would say, of our business. But usually, when we were going into the past and doing this exercise for the previous years, we could see an addition of 400 billions every year, more or less, coming on the table. So really, the situation of having 900 billions coming and being announced on the last 12 months is just massive. And of course, it would bring a lot of, I would say, business on the table, because that's almost 2 years of addition that came in just a bit more than one. So going into the details, but that's really the figures, and that's why we are also in a boom, and all the supply chain is under pressure, and it will remain under pressure. But if we start to go in the details, and that's the figures I put here on the left of the slide, there were 500 billions addition in oil and gas. From that, about half were, I would say, addition on the LNG business. And of course, that's more than the usual, because there were always addition to the LNG business. On the previous year, we could see addition of a bit more than 100 billion coming on top of the table. But here, the figure just double. Quite simply compared to the addition of previous years. So you see the acceleration in the trend that we see, and in the figures inside also oil and gas, we saw offshore taking off because offshore was getting really slow, especially the fixed offshore and deep offshore was getting really slow during COVID and after COVID in the year 2020 and 2021. And then a huge acceleration just on the last, I would say, 13, 14 months. Trying to replace the Russian supply. And here the biggest move is, of course, coming from FPSOs, where, okay, it's just booming everywhere. So 500 billions just for the oil and gas. When you look at petrochem, that's 150 billion more. So it's also quite massive. A little bit smaller, I would say, scale than the oil and gas, but still quite a big increase. And then you have energy transition really coming just out of the blue with 250 billions more. This, of course, nothing to compare to the previous years, because that was a market on energy transition which was not happening or not existing, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago. And now he had 250 billions on the table in just 12 to 14 months. So it's massive. And when we try to say, okay, what are the drivers behind this trend, and where those 900 billions come from, because that's the 3 billion question, almost. And here we have different drivers which are all going in the same direction. The first one, it's not so much specific to this year, that every year we have report of project being postponed, project being delayed, and everything. So there is a natural effect of between 100 to 200 billions every year of project being postponed, which come in addition of the actual business and vision that we have, because projects which were supposed to happen in 2022 are getting postponed, and of course they enter this, I would say, segment of period 2023 to 2027. So this is a natural effect. Yeah, it's hard to say really how much, but this natural effect is almost every year happening. So it's not so much explaining this huge volume of increase, but it's explaining at least why in those 900 you may have 100 to 200 billions just coming from this natural effect. The second part, which is really an addition that we have seen starting last year, it's a catch-up from COVID delay. Yeah, I'm sure you remember, but we spoke about it already. During 2020, okay, many investments were stopped because nobody was sure where we are going. And of course, all the investments which were not made in 2020 had to happen later on. So we are still catching up from this COVID, and it still has a lot of effect. So of course, it participates to this bubble of project we see on the table. The third point, but which is massive, is energy transition. As I said, 3 years ago it was nothing. Last year it was an addition of 50 billions, and this year it's an addition of 250. So of course you can imagine just a 200 billions increase compared to last year in terms of addition to the market. So of course it's ballooning the market up, and it's a huge effect it has on the market because the actors are quite sometimes the same. So, and especially, I would say, in the engineering side of the company or the contractors. So, of course, everybody is getting more and more room being filled in the book order from energy transition project, which is great because it's a big market. But okay, let's see how much it goes for next year. Then you have Europe funding its sovereignty. Okay, I would say the Russian ban and the heat was quite huge. So Europe is financing a lot of energy transition, but also a lot of projects trying to source from different other region, especially in North Africa. So it's bringing a lot of money on the table as well. And US is also playing the game to become the biggest player of LNG and skyrocketing its capacities of energy. Of course, to replace Russia in a supply of LNG to Europe. So of course, it's quite massive the effect on the market because those energy projects are quite huge in volume and they are numerous. So it's just booming on top of that. And the last part, but which is a natural effect that we have seen, I would say, started 5 years ago, and that will carry on until the end of the decade, is the growth into petrochem product. And of course, if you want to have petrochem product, especially ethylene and all the variation of plastic, you need to have more raw material, which means more gas and more oil. So this is driving also a little bit the production, but also the investment in petrochem because there's just a need for those petrochem products. So when you combine all of these, it creates a huge wave on top of the existing wave we were already having, because some are linked to Ukraine, like this energy transition, Europe and US, but the others are just, I would say, natural effect of growth on the market. So you see, it's a double effect that is making the market just balloon today, and it should be, I mean, it should take some years, of course, to buffer this demand. And at least today, we don't see it slowing down. So it means that, okay, it will be and it will remain the situation for quite some years at least. No, it has an impact on the geography, of course, and here it's quite specific. But here, just if we took it from the global picture, we extract the map from Project Smart Explorer, and as you may remember, each green dot is a project around the planet. So you see, there is, I mean, it's like a sickness. There is just point everywhere. And of course, US is remaining a huge hub. You have Brazil, Buenos Aires, which is huge. Middle East is huge, and Asia Pacific remains super high. What is quite uncanny and quite new to this year, I would say, and which are almost direct, I would say, either direct or side effect of the Ukraine crisis, is Europe being just fully loaded of points because of energy transition project. And also you see this part of North Africa, which is getting super, and also the Mediterranean Sea, if I may say, getting really busy with many projects around the planet, and also Africa benefiting from this effect to trying to replace Russia with many projects. So if you compare the map to the map we had last year and the map we had the previous year, you see that the region and the hubs are changing a little bit, which is quite interesting because it's opening door to new companies, to new type of project, to new region, and of course opening a lot of project business or development effort that you could be made with less competition. So it's quite interesting, honestly, to see the market moving in different areas. No, if we go in the detail of those variation, I try to map the market split between 2022 and 2023 of our vision. And I put here on the right you have the figures and the graph to compare, but on the left I put you the variation, and you see Africa, one of the biggest winner I would say of the last year, with a 3-point increase on the market, knowing that the market is booming. So the market is increasing, and into this increasing market, the market share of Africa is even growing, which means that the effort in Africa is going from 1 to 3 almost. I mean, in terms of volume of capex. So it's really massive. At the opposite, Asia Pacific is reducing, contracting quite heavily. Europe is growing, mostly driven by energy transition, because here we talk about the location of projects. So Europe is really growing, which was not the case for many years, because Europe was almost non-existent in terms of project location, and you see how fast it's coming back. Middle East, of course, is not slowing down, but just that their market share is slowing down because they were running already full speed. And you have North America, which is increasing even more what all the efforts that they were doing. Knowing that US, I would say, is a specific case that I'm going to discuss in a minute. But here the variation are quite huge. Honestly, we didn't have so much variation in I would say last 10 years, except I would say the barrel price drop and the COVID, of course. But we are still in a market shock where regions are reaffecting themselves, because Asia Pacific and Middle East, which were the two I would say leading countries in market share, which are still remaining at this table, are being challenged. Because today Africa is representing as much business as Middle East, okay, in the configuration. So it's quite massive, the shock. And US is representing as much business as Asia Pacific, where before Asia Pacific was the biggest place. So you see how fast things are changing. It's quite interesting to see the dynamics today. South America remaining, I would say, a specific market which is not moving, increasing and following the market, because most of the time there are side investment being made by other players. So you see, it's quite massive, honestly, in terms of production, in terms of interest for project location, but it's not, I would say, the only effect that we have seen. The second effect we have seen is, of course, on the geography of the energy flow, especially for the oil and gas, because before this Ukraine crisis, and that's the map on the left, you see the main flow of especially gas was coming from Russia to Europe, US to for a small part to Europe, etc., etc. And we are now in a new situation where Russia is not going to supply anymore to Europe, and Russia has to redirect its flow back to Asia Pacific. And while the main supply to Europe will come from US and partly also from Africa and this Mediterranean Sea, we are going. So it's quite massive. I mean, this exchange of flow that we are seeing. Of course, to readapt those routes is not an easy task, and that's why Jean-Charles was explaining that the LNG tanker business is just booming. The terminal of LNG is just booming, because of course just a lot of infrastructure you need, just not to replace the production, but to replace I would say the supply and the midstream industry that we have put in place. So what we see, and it start to be quite aligned now, that the energy routes are back to normality, meaning they are back to following the political order. Because if you take the history of the 100 last years, I would say, most of the time the energy routes were following the political routes. Okay, and having such disparity between politics and energy is sometimes a bad strategy, and some countries in Europe are paying it. So we are back, I would say, to a normality. Now, if we focus on two aspects of the geography, one of the key points that are going is playing a role already, but is going to take quite a long time to appear, is the relationship between Russia and Gulf countries. Because for quite a long time they were partners, especially in OPEC plus countries. But tomorrow, when Russia is going to push its supply to China and to India, because that's the only market able to I would say absorb their production, most likely Middle East and Russia are going to compete over the supply of oil and gas. And many projects are being launched in this way. Russia launched the Power of Siberia 2, which is a pipeline going from Yamal to China, Not sure how you can do that technically, and I would say in terms of financing because it's tough. But they have the project to do it, and Russia wants to multiply by 3 its supply of gas and oil to China, and that's really their strategy announced and publicly announced today. And at the opposite, you have all the Middle East operators which are trying to protect their supply to those markets by investing in petrochem projects in India and in China. And that's why I put you here the map on the left, where each green dot is a petrochem project, is a refinery or an ethylene cracker made by Middle East operator into those two countries. So you see how much, because of course, as soon as you get the refinery in China, you are the one supplying this refinery. So it's a way to protect your market. So today we are not yet at the price or anything because the last OPEC plus meeting went quite well, I would say, but most likely in the future there would be a war on the price to supply China and India. And one of the key aspects of that is the last weeks, Russia and Saudi Arabia agreed to be paid by China in yuan, so in the local money, for the supply of oil and gas. So it's quite interesting to see that. Of course, India and China are going to play the game of this fight between the two regions because that's for their own benefit, I would say. But Russia and Saudi Arabia are, let's say, agreeing and let's say playing the game to go far and beyond to supply those countries. So it will remain, takes quite a time, but it's going to be a fierce competition between those countries and those two regions. The second part, which is quite important, I think to mention, is US. Um, as we say, and we have seen that in the previous slide in terms of geography, US is increasing, not only on North America, but I would say US being the leader is going to increase. And US is set to become the first exporter of LNG. It's almost the case today in front of Qatar and US. For quite a time, they were fighting, I would say, with not in LNG, but in total gas export with Russia, because Russia was a huge also exporter, not in LNG, but an exporter of gas. And the US was fighting, but of course, with all the situation with Ukraine, the export of Russian gas went really low. At the opposite, the US went really up. Which means today, that's for just for the gas, US is the first producer for many years, but was initially producer for its own, I would say, consumption. Today, US is able to manage its own consumption very well to the point that they are becoming the first exporter of gas worldwide, which is massive. And of course, if you take into account that Europe, and here you have the curve on the left, US is going to stage and really take a huge leadership into those LNG export, having the goal behind to supply Europe, of course, because as Russia is not going to supply Europe anymore, most likely US will take the lead on that. And if we just imagine in terms of figures, in terms of revenue, if Europe shifts its supply to US, it's a yearly revenue for US of 120 billions. It's a yearly revenue. So you can imagine how fast the US companies, but also the US government were to act to say, okay, guys, we need to be able to supply Europe. And of course, it's a big race to ramp up all the terminals, all the LNG tankers as of today, because there is a lot of money to be made. And of course, if they start to build this partnership, it's a revenue that will happen every year. So if you need to put 100 billions to collect 100 billions every year, of course, it's a game where they are willing to play. So most likely, and it's already happening, US is taking the leadership in gas. Now, if we go to the oil, and that's the second point on the right, US is going to wait more and more in oil. They have ramped up their production with shale oil for quite many years. Today, they're the first producer of oil with 12 million barrels per day in terms of production, and they are targeting to add another million to this in the next 2 years. So it's quite massive, again, in terms of evolution, in terms of growth. So even if Biden was elected and everything, it didn't stop, I would say, the effort of US to become the leader of oil and gas and in energy globally, and it should remain a Navy player in this oil, even if the oil market is more distributed than the gas market. So the leadership might be a little bit tough for them to handle because OPEC and OPEC Plus still weight twice to 3 times more US, but still it means that US has a huge impact, of course, on the market. And the last part, which is going to be interesting, that I would say for energy transition, Europe was really at the lead at the beginning and for quite some years. And we have seen US ramping up their capacities quite heavily on energy transition. And of course, when Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, it was a huge propeller for the energy transition in US. First, not really into build project of energy transition, but mainly to build up the supply chain of those energy transition projects, meaning, for example, the solar panels, the windmills, the crackers, and all the recycling licensing, for example. But of course, that's the first wave, and in 2 years' time, we see a huge wave of projects in energy transition coming up in US. Just one figure exported from the database Project Smart Explorer. You see in terms of profile of companies, operators in US, about 82% of them are independent companies, meaning that they are not the big boys, Exxon, Chevron, blah, blah, blah. They are not made by, I would say, outsiders like Saudi Aramco making projects in US, etc. They are really a small portion of the market. 82% of the market is done by almost private company or I would say a few big listed companies. But I mean, the market is there. It's a huge volume of project. It's a huge volume of capex being invested just in US. Honestly, and of course the players are quite different. So if you remember our previous webinars and session, most of them are new business model oriented. Most of them go fast track because the money is just at the end of the table, and they receive a lot of, I would say, support from their public authorities, even if I would say from the White House it's not so much public. So it's quite interesting, and US market is going to increase even more in the future because it doesn't seem that they are slowing down their growth, obviously. No, focusing just on key application because we have seen that there is a huge boom on the market. We've seen that some geography are quite interesting as well. Now, if we go by the spectrum of those key application, there will be a lot of things to say, but we just selected three just to show you different phenomena. Of course, the main one is LNG. No surprise when we look at the impact of, but almost direct and immediate impact of the Ukraine crisis. LNG projects were ramped up quite hugely. You see that 2022 was already a big year. 2023 is going to be massive in terms of capex being invested, and you start to see here in 2025 another peak. The simple reason is that here in 2023, you find the phase one project, and in 2025, you find the phase two project. So you see it's really long-term projects which have been launched and reprograms of LNG ramping up, and LNG is going to pursue its growth for many reasons. The first one is, of course, to supply, I would say, Europe and replace the Russian supply. But there is also two other reasons which are playing quite a role, is to feed the petrochem. Because if you want to have any petrochem activity, and petrochem is needing more and more product every year, you need oil, okay, to produce naphtha and then crack to make byproduct. But if you want to make ethylene and polyethylene and all its variation, it's more useful to use LNG. So a part, and not a marginal part, but a big part of this energy growth goes directly to petrochem. So it's not even a question about the price of the gas, it goes directly to the petrochem, and then it's sold as plastic and etc. etc. And here the price is quite more stable, so it's a good feedstock for all those projects. The second part, which is also helping LNG to develop, is that LNG, even if it's a fossil fuel, it's part of any energy transition scenario. And here, if you are European, you know what it is, because for the European Union, but it's the case in US and all the developed countries, each time we talk about natural gas, it's labeled as a green energy. And there it's a big question mark. So why is natural gas part of green energy? And the simple reason that if already you start to make an energy transition and you start to stop the fossil fuel, etc., if you just transition from coal and oil to gas, you are reducing the CO2 emission by such an amount that you are already not saving the planet, but you are doing already a huge impact in reducing your carbon footprint. So that's why all the political scenarios around the planet are understanding that obviously we cannot close the tap and just stop oil from one day to another. But already if we are able to transition all the application from oil to gas, it will have a huge effect, and that's why investment in LNG are still carrying on, and more applications that were done in coal or in oil will go to gas. In terms of factor and operators, IOCs are really leading the game with independent. Honestly, if we look here at the graph per type of operators, you have here the big boys, the IOCs. They are the one, the Shell, the BP, Exxon, Total, all of those big boys. They are the one doing the project. Most of them, for example, either in Brazil or in Africa or in all those regions to the export. Here are the NOCs. Either in Asia Pacific, small countries, or Qatar. So here you have the big part, and in green you have all the, I would say, US shale gas independent companies. So you see how the market is fragmented, but it's good to see that the IOCs are playing a huge role into those LNG projects. One other point which is quite important to mention about LNG is, of course, the electrification. Because when you build up an LNG train, most of the time they are run by gas turbine, but the emission of gas turbine is just massive, and not so much company are still able today to increase their carbon footprint like they want. Almost no company can do it now. So we have seen on the last 6 months a lot of redesign and even FEED being redone to go to electrification and e-train, electrical train. So of course it has a huge impact on the design of the project, because most of the project, for example, I don't know if they had 2 gas turbine train, they need to go to 4 smaller train run by electricity. So it has huge impact on the design. But of course, there is a lot of money to be made, and the carbon footprint increase is not acceptable anymore. So it has a huge impact on the project as well. The second point that is worth looking at on this application is FPSO. As we mentioned, and here you have the forecast 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. You see how packed it is already for the, I would say, 4 coming years. I mean, every people which are able to today deliver an FPSO are more welcome to put their shipyard on the web, because everybody is receiving, I would say, orders or quotation, requests of quotation from everywhere. It's a market which is quite specific, because 40% of the FPSOs go to South America. So it's not, there is no other case of this situation. And you have Africa also, a huge player with 22% of this market. So it's market, I mean, between Guyana and Brazil, you may have, I don't know, 1/3 of the market for FPSOs. But of course, even if the FPSOs go for operation there, most of the decisions are not made into those regions. They are made in US or in Europe or in Asia, I would say. So it's quite interesting to see that the region is quite leading from South America, but still the decision centers are remaining the same. In terms of factors, IOCs are really playing the game. They are having massive investment and a huge focus on FPSOs. It's quite interesting to see that they are going less and less to lease those FPSOs to SBM or to BW Offshore, for example, but they are going to get back the operation into their hands. So it's a massive trend that we see on the last few months. Now the challenge is to say, okay, where do you build those FPSOs? Because all the shipyard were already pretty busy. As you understood from Jean-Charles, many shipyards got busy, even more busy with LNG tankers. So when comes the time to build an FPSO, there is not so many players to be around the table. So, and we have seen, for example, and I think we published it this morning, the Equinor Pau de Asuka, where they were trying to make an FPSO with Modec, but Modec didn't have the space, or canceled the space for their shipyard. So it means that they are really struggling to find the convenient place to build up these FPSOs, and it's not easy, and many projects will be postponed, because if you take the situation and forecast we have, you see it almost double what it was the market before. So of course there is not enough shipyard to build up this around the planet. So it will remain, it will be buffered, given the capacities of the contractors and the engineering companies. But still, it's remaining a good business. The last point, which is quite interesting to mention, are the e-fuel and biofuel, and any type of energy transition fuel you can have. You have many applications behind those e-fuel, but you have, for example, renewable diesel, you have sustainable aviation fuels, the SAF, but you have also the biodiesel, the biofuel, and all the different applications you can find behind. And it's quite it's interesting to see that the processes are quite different depending on the feedstock and the product. I mean, you have the input and the one you want to have at the output, but the benefits are the same. The first one is the decarbonation, because you are going to be able, by reusing, I would say, carbon waste or carbon product, you are going to be able to produce a fuel which has a carbon footprint which is either neutral or negative. And of course, okay, today, even if your gasoline costs more, just by it having a carbon footprint negative, it has a huge value, way more, I would say, than the energy itself. And the second point, and which is exactly going also in the same direction and pushing in the same direction, is the sovereignty. Because when you try to go into energy transition, having those e-fuel and biofuel request, I would say, a smaller adaptation for especially the transportation industry. And we have the case, I think it was 2 days ago, we published a project made by Porsche in South America, where the car manufacturer, okay, is trying to pursue all those electrical cars and everything, but they have understood that adapting all the industry of transportation to electrical car is almost impossible, because you need to change the electrical grid, you need to produce the electricity that, okay, it's not from one day to another, and you need to change all the cars and everything. So it's a huge adaptation in terms of time and in terms of investment. Now, if you go to those fuel and biofuel and you're able to say, okay, my fuel and my consumption is either carbon neutral or carbon negative, here, the adaptation of the car, it's almost the same. You need to change a little bit the motor, but the petrol station are the same. You don't need to change the roads, you don't need to change the electrical grid or anything. So, of course, there is a huge question from European countries, but also from US and all the, I would say, developed countries which were trying to go electrical, to say, okay, is there not an opportunity with those fuel? Because that's also some value we can create inside, and not to import Chinese car, for example. And the second point about the sovereignty is that most of this production can be done locally with farm waste, with bio waste, with recycling CO2 and producing green hydrogen, and you combine them from the CO2 you capture industrial application. So you see, it's a double effect you can have with those fuel, where you can guarantee that you have your sovereignty, you can produce locally, and you have less effort to adapt into energy transition, and it also have a good impact on the planet. So it's quite interesting to see here that it's really way dominated by independent actors, which are completely, I would say, new companies for half of them, which is quite interesting. They are startups, they are users of gas, they are gas distributors or whatever. So not really used to, I would say, production of gas, but which are used to processes and which are investing heavily into those markets. And of course, the region, and this is no surprise, US is, I would say, representing half of the project today, and it's massive. Europe present about 20%, because of course the need for e-fuel in Europe is way lower than the one in US. But it's quite interesting to see that the FEED and especially the EPC are all executed either in US or in Europe. So which means that you have here the two hubs of energy transition taking off a huge momentum on those e-fuel and biofuel to decarbonate the industry, and to also try to produce their own fuel, not depending on other region. So it's quite interesting, and it has been boomed by Ukraine, because when you could not buy your gasoline, especially in Europe, from Ukraine, or your gas from not Ukraine, but from Russia, it was easier to produce it locally, and it financed a lot of projects done locally in Europe. Going to a conclusion, and I see time is passing fast. Our anticipation on Ukraine crisis, which was obviously going to have a massive impact, materialized. What is quite interesting, it happened faster than anticipated, and it happened easier or smoother, I would say, than expected. Everybody was announcing energy crunch. Countries, especially in Europe, going without energy for the winter and blah, blah, blah. finally, we end up the winter with all the storage of gas, for example, in Europe, almost half full or 80% full, which means that countries were really fast to really direct their supply of gas and to manage their effort. So, of course, okay, it was hard to anticipate such a massive investment and I would say alignment between the countries, but it happened, and it happened in huge ways. Of course, this shift in energy redefined really the supply to match with the political order. That's something that we say, but if we, okay, outside of Europe, I would say the impact were a little bit smaller, but if we sit in Europe, the gas supply moved from the east, meaning Russia, to the west. So what was done by Russia will be done by US. And the oil, which was also supplied from the north, will later on come from the south. So mostly this Mediterranean area and Africa. But also it was, I would say, the occasion and a big driver to push even more for energy transition. So all the Western countries, OECD countries, which are already active in energy transition, put another, I would say, ticket into it because it was also a solution to pave and to face this emergency. So it's a wave, if not waves of investment we were seeing because they were, I would say, wave because there were demand growing for oil and gas products and energy product. You had a second wave coming on top of that with, I would say, the catch-up of COVID. And Ukraine is a third wave, even bigger than the two first, which were already existing. So it means that we're in the situation today where, okay, you better get your boat and try to aim for the right direction because it's going to be massive what the industry has to buffer and to absorb in the coming years. Obviously, it's not something that is going to be able to be absorbed on the, I would say, next 2 to 3 years. It's something just in terms of vision we have today, something that may take 5 to 7 years, meaning till the end of the decade to absorb. If there is no other wave already announced on top of those three. LNG FPSOs, I would say, for the oil and gas would be the main driver to replace this Russian supply. And also energy transition dynamic is propelling new players and new technologies, which, of course, we try to follow them as closely as possible to make sure that you can benefit from those projects. And we are doing efforts. The last one Jean-Charles mentioned is white hydrogen, new application we enter this week. And I'm quite sure we'll have a new application in the next coming 2 months. So that's an evolution we are starting to follow up, and we are pleased to help all of you also position yourself on this energy transition, because maybe you have seen our post on Tuesday, but in 2023, the investment for energy transition would be bigger than the investment for petrochem. And of course, okay, it means that energy transition is no more marginal. That's a huge market opening up, which is taking off quickly, and we are doing all our best to position yourself on those markets and to take advantage of it.